Hey guys, so we're here today to talk about hybrid IT and the seamless service experience that can be obtained irrespective of where your solution or infrastructure is located. We're also going to talk about a new type of technology, which is hyperconverged infrastructure and the benefits of that. And we're also going to introduce a model of how we assess where applications should go, what infrastructure they should sit on, and how over the top of all of that, you can have the same service experience irrespective of location. So my name is Dale Wilson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Brennan IT. I've been in this IT game for 20 years, sort of half in cloud and half in telco. And also we have Brendan IT, who's a technology evangelist from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. He's going to be talking about hyperconverged infrastructure. So we'll just kick straight into it. A bit of housekeeping. So if you have any questions, please use the WebEx functionality and type those questions in. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions. So the challenges of hybrid IT are real. There's multiple conflicting priorities that IT departments have today. Obviously the ongoing finding the right people is probably the hardest one, especially for some, specialty skill sets like storage and security. There's been a once bitten, twice shy, sort of impact of public cloud. A lot of people have been there and actually got burnt in the process of getting migrating the data in and migrating the data out, which is even harder. Backups are still a problem. Not so much the fact that we've shifted from tape to disk. Now it's the actual backup applications are still failing at a very high rate, and a lot of applications don't get backed up overnight. So the biggest challenge is very much around the actual, sort of growth, the capacity in the number of apps, the sort of integration requirements that IT departments are having today, and the ongoing sort of challenges they're having around sort of capacity growth. So it makes sense, hybrid IT as an approach, it makes sense, when it comes to innovation and flexibility. So what I mean by that is that basically, the more innovation that's going on inside an application, the more control you need for that application. It also reduces the overall costs when you have a bit of both. There's never going to be a perfect greenfield environment where everything's in the cloud or everything is, on-prem. There's usually a mix of both based on the age of the assets that are sort of in the current production of an IT department. There's also a lot of risk with shifting exclusively to one solution or the other. It also depends on the compliance requirements of each application, especially depending on if it's government or regulatory. There's a lot of different frameworks that need to be considered, and there's no horses for course. There's no silver bullet that covers everything. So what we have is a workload assessment tool. So this is basically it's an application feasibility tool which defines what is the appropriate infrastructure solution and location for each one of your applications. Step one is a security and risk assessment. Step two is a technical assessment. And step three is a cost assessment. So we'll just run through that model now and get a feel for where apps should go. So firstly, in terms of the security and risk assessment, there's a whole bunch of, up the top there's a whole bunch of different sort of controls that you need to consider or requirements that you need a compensating control for. So if we just run through them, data classification. So this is if your data is actually classified by the government, whether it's protected or highly protected or in confidence, there's various levels of classification that the government sort of mandate. And then if you are looking to shift this data to a cloud provider, you need to consider those classification requirements in the actual solution. Similar, but the difference is the privacy concerns. There's a lot of data. It may not be classified, but if it got out, it would actually be very detrimental to the company or the organisation that has it. You need to consider that in terms of your security controls, in terms of what security technologies are in front of your data. Next thing is around contractual risk. So what I mean by acquisition candidate is if the piece of software that you're looking to shift to the cloud or the cloud provider themselves are potentially going to be bought by another company, it's probably the worst time to then get into a 1, 2, or 3 year contract, for those services, because you might get stuck with it. So you need to consider what's going on with the actual underlying companies. The need for compliance, so that's around whether it's a regulatory compliance requirement or framework like APRA or PCI DSS or ISO, and there are other various ones, but basically they all sort of mandate that you need to do certain things in your solution that you need to make sure that are covered for in the solution that you're going for when you shift to the cloud. Mission critical, this is around the availability of the application, so you need to consider this from a downtime perspective. If the app was to go down, what impact would it have financially on the business? And then you need to make sure that you obtain the appropriate SLA on availability, that you are covered financially for that downtime. And brand protection. So similar to privacy concerns, a lot of companies, if their data got out, they actually capture a lot of data that, if it got out, would be very detrimental to them. So you need to consider some security solutions here in your data, like DLP solutions, where that can protect you from having your data sort of put in public. We move to the next component. So if you don't have a compensating control for any of these sort of critical security components, then the answer is the no, which means you need to maintain complete control of this application, which then means you actually just need to have a co-location and dedicated infrastructure solution. You can't look at a cloud provider and some type of virtualized solution. But then step 2 is a technical assessment. So firstly, the software and hypervisor alignment. The way this sort of step 2 works is you give it a score out of 10 and you calculate the total score, then that will sort of specify, what's the appropriate type of cloud solution for you. So the software and hypervisor alignment is very much around sort of ease of migration. It's much easier to migrate, a VM than it is to convert it from Hyper-V or whatever. And that sort of ties into the feasible migration strategy. So where this can get messy is when you don't know how long you're going to be down for when you're migrating to the cloud. So you need to consider, things like replication of data and actually potentially having some type of staging sort of period where you might be live in both solutions, both the in-house and the cloud solution, with data replicating between the two. So considering how long you can be down for is very important. Unsupported feature needs, so if there's particular features that you need for your application that the cloud provider is not providing, you need to consider that and whether you really need those features. Network connectivity is very much around, the golden rule is you should always have the application no greater than 30 milliseconds from the users. So you need to consider if if your data is going to be in Australia versus potentially in Singapore or Hong Kong or whatever, because that will create performance issues for your users. Next one is around the skills in the cloud software stack. So that's very much, is the provider, really an expert at this, or do they expose the tools for you to do it yourself? Are they exposing, vCloud Director for you to manage yourself or some other hypervisor, or are they going to do the whole thing for you? You need to consider then from an SLA perspective, how good are they really at what they do? So you add up all of those scores out of 10, you end up with a total score, which then sort of drives, which solution you go for. If it's low, then still the best option is a colo or dedicated infrastructure solution. If you got a medium score between sort of 30 and 60, then there is value in private cloud, SaaS, and potentially IaaS options for private cloud specifically. And if it's you get a high score, then you can move to potentially public cloud providers. So the last step, which is usually the first step that everyone goes straight to, but it is the last step, is the cost assessment. So that's around firstly understanding that to get your data into the cloud, it generally costs you about 10% of the solution. You need to consider the depreciation on existing infrastructure. You may find that your CFO or your accountants are telling you that you can't migrate this stuff off yet because they're still trying to write off the value of this for the next 3 years on their books. And you should also model in potentially any OPEX savings around headcount that you potentially don't need anymore if you're migrating to the cloud. So that's how we assess, at a per application basis, what type of cloud solution or in-house or combination of the both that customers should go for. Now this sort of ties into the next slide, which is migrating legacy workloads. There is a lot of risk, and migrating legacy workloads, it's not always an easy thing to do, especially if it's an old application and has very specific requirements around hardware. It introduces risk and potential downtime, and sometimes when it's legacy, you need to consider if it's even worth it. You might be better off just leaving it where it is, and then in 2 to 3 years' time, migrating directly to some type of SaaS solution once your application is end of life. So I'm going to hand over now to Brendan IT, our HPE expert on hyperconverged infrastructure.
Thanks, Dale. All right, so we've talked about some of the complexities, I guess, that Dale raised, some of the risks, some of the problems that might get running legacy, and the boom of the cloud and the hybridity where customers want to go today. So HPE actually have one of our core beliefs is the world will be hybrid, and I guess from that, one of our key strategies is we want to make hybrid IT simple. And one of the things that we believe is that you have to find that right mix of what actually should remain on premises, as Dale talked about through the assessment, and what workloads or applications you can potentially put into either a private cloud or a public cloud. So we'll start with just have a look at the evolution of hyperconvergence. And the first thing that you'll see here is that legacy stack. And I'm sure a lot of you have, you probably look at this and ask yourself, what do I have currently in my infrastructure that I'm managing? You've probably got servers, you've probably got, running some form of virtualization hypervisor there. You've got a storage switch. A lot of you might have shared storage in the form of a SAN. You probably have a backup and dedupe solution if you've got quite a lot of data. Dale mentioned the proliferation of storage and data is a big thing now. If you've got multiple sites, you probably have a WAN optimization solution. Cloud gateway, you might have SSD array for a hot tier of storage for higher IOPS. And down the bottom there, we've got data protection applications. So, a lot of you will be paying licensing maybe for Veeam, for Commvault, very, very specific backup solutions. So each one of those things could be potentially from a different vendor, could be different contractual life cycles, different contract end dates, and different levels of expertise as well that you have to gear up in your organization to be able to ongoingly manage, support, and run. So it does get a bit complicated, and that's why I guess 2008, 2009, we started to see these things called integrated systems. And integrated systems were, you had solutions out there like vBlock, VCE, and HP back then had our converged systems as well. These systems were essentially pre-integrated servers and storage out of factory, and they would get shipped on site to your customers. And once the customers actually receive this, essentially then it's primed and ready to go against typically a reference architecture so that you can run Oracle or you can go run SQL on this sort of setup. these are quite large solutions, and we took away one layer of complexity, but as you can see below that dotted line, you still had to, figure out how you're going to manage backup and dedupe. You still have a WAN optimization solution if you've got multiple sites. You still do need an SSD array, and you probably still need your data protection. So along came hyperconvergence. Hyperconvergence you've probably seen, I'd say, for the past 3 years, quite commercially now, and there are quite a lot of players in the market. But you'll see that all they've essentially done is, again, converged everything above that dotted line. So that's your compute with your hypervisor and your shared storage. But what they've done is they've moved it onto just your standard x86 building blocks, and these are essentially nodes and appliances now, and they'll scale out as you need more storage. You purchase another node and you scale out that solution. It's great because it's simple, it's easy to manage, but you can see here there are still bits missing in this puzzle. Everything below the line still needs to be managed separately to your hyperconverged solution. So whilst you've taken away some layers of complexity, there are still a lot of layers of complexity that you can eliminate. And that's what HPE SimpliVity has done, right? So we introduced HPE SimpliVity, and the vision that we had was we just wanted to make everything simple. And the name SimpliVity is, resonant of that. And you can see that everything now below that dotted line is now encapsulated in the SimpliVity hyperconverged solution from HPE. So yes, we've got data protection built into this. Yes, we have backup and dedupe built into this. Because of the way that we handle the data and how granular we get, and how we do the backup, and how we dedupe and how we compress, you've essentially eliminated the need of a WAN optimizer because we don't send much data over the line now. You don't need necessarily a dark fiber connection. You don't necessarily need a very large pipe anymore. So I'll take you through the SimpliVity solution now, and you've understood the evolution of where we've got to today. The real secret sauce here in SimpliVity is what we call the OMNISTACK data virtualization platform, or the DVP. The DVP essentially starts off with a physical card in each one of these nodes. And each one of these nodes is a DL380 based appliance. And this actual card, this accelerator card, takes on every single bit of data that's written on a VM on the hyperconverged system, passes through this card, and that'll dedupe and it'll compress at inception once and forever. And that's important because we're not doing this post. This happens as data is written to the disk. So what's important here is guaranteed data efficiency. Biggest takeaway from here is if you are running, ask yourself, if you have 100 terabytes worth of production data and backup data, we're saying that 100 terabytes would only require 10 terabytes of disk on SimpliVity's HPE SimpliVity solution. So you're saving quite a lot here, and you'll be able to reduce the footprint and your costs because of this always-on compression and deduplication. So the built-in resiliency enables us to offer you a different type of agility in your organization now. I mean, ask yourselves, how many of you have backup windows that you have to perform at night, and the backups, might take 4 hours or something to complete? It leaves you with, a lot of you probably want to back up during the day. I mean, we speak to a lot of customers and they say that I would back up during the day and more frequently now if I could, but it affects my performance and I can't suffer throughout the day from doing backups. So with HPE SimpliVity, because we can guarantee that always-on compression and deduplication, and it's offloaded to that accelerator card, you actually don't take away from any CPU cycles from each of these nodes. You don't take away from the RAM. So we can guarantee performance throughout the day if you were to back up. We can actually perform a backup of a 1 terabyte VM locally in less than 60 seconds. And we can restore that as well in less than 60 seconds, which is unheard of. And a lot of people, when they first see this, find that a bit hard to believe. And I got to admit, when I first came across this technology, I was also a bit, amazed and at these claims, and it might have been just marketing, but when you see it for yourself, it is actually quite mind-blowing, and there's a lot of value to be had when you can back up throughout the day, off-site as well, and globally dedupe across multiple sites in Australia and even across to New Zealand or in Asia if you wish as well. And the third value here is just around the global centric management. We have a lot of policy-driven VM policies, I guess. So if you have a set of 30 virtual machines, you can actually apply one policy, say call it a bronze policy, over the top of all 30, and it'll update that when you update that bronze policy. Now, bronze policy might just say that we want to back up these VMs every 24 hours and retain those backups for 7 days. You might have a silver policy applied to just 15 of them on top of the bronze policy, and that might say, back up every 4 hours and retain those backups for 48 hours. You can do that, and when you do this, it doesn't actually add that much to your overall storage. Again, we have that always on compression and deduplication. The simplicity of this actually comes with the tool integration into vCenter. So those of you who use vCenter today, we say you're about 90% of the way there and trained up to use SimpliVity. It's just a plugin into your existing vCenter, and it's just 3-click, pretty much right-click on a VM, and you can hit the SimpliVity menu and say, I want to back up this VM. It's actually very, very simple in that regard. Now, because of all this simplicity, we have to be able to back it up, right? And we're saying that, hey, we want to offer our customers with these 5 SimpliVity guarantees. We call it the HyperGuarantee. We've got 1,300 customers, almost 1,400 customers across the world now on this, and we offer this guarantee to all of them because we're that confident that we can save 90% capacity across all storage and backup combined. Again, the second point there is under 1 minute, we can complete a local backup and restore to a VM, a 1 terabyte VM as well. And simplicity in the fact that 3 clicks is all you need to back up, restore, move, or clone a VM from a single console. I mean, those of you know how long it takes to move a VM from one data store to another in traditional vCenter, or clone a VM. It can take you half an hour to do. We can do that in less than a minute sort of thing. Again, we talked about those policies. It's under a minute to update and create these policies, and the rules associated to those policies are very, very simple as well. And the availability aspect as well, we're able to provide zero disruption. We can support stretch clusters. We're inherently supporting a lot of the VMware suite here with vRealize. Talking about hybrid solutions, we've got customers who are running HP SimpliVity with things like OpenStack, and be able to move workloads onto AWS if they wish. We do have support for VMware Cloud on AWS as well from this solution. So whilst this is a very, very good on-premise solution, it does have the connectors to be able to move some of those workloads prem as you see fit, as you go through the assessment with HP and Brennan IT as well. So I'll hand it back to Dale quickly just to talk about some of the other benefits from this.
Yeah, so just at a more of a business level, one of the obvious benefits here is migration. So, compared to migrating your data to a public cloud provider, which can take literally weeks, as Brendan said, this can take a minute. Yeah, it can take a minute from, one sort of resource pool to another within VMware. So it's a very, very, very easy and fast migration process. There's also, some financial benefits around depreciation. So if you're a company that, likes CapEx, a lot of companies do like CapEx, they like spending CapEx, it's good for their books, and they like to depreciate a whole bunch of stuff. So with this type of solution, it's not an OpEx flavored solution like cloud is. You can purchase this as a one-off and then depreciate it over time. But then also it gives you more control. So you're maintaining control of your data. Like I said before, everyone's been to public cloud and sort of been burnt, not only with getting the data into public cloud, but also with the service experience. So, the SLAs are not what they appear to be with the sticker that you've got to read the fine print. So this gives you far more control, where you can sort of guarantee the performance locally of your data. And if necessary, you can swap managed service providers in and out to manage the operating systems on top of that without actually losing control of your data. So there are some of the key sort of benefits, sort of the above and beyond the technical benefits as well.
Yeah, and just talking about shrinking platforms, I mean, I forgot to add that, we do have customers who, there are some soft costs to this that they've been able to get benefits out of. And that's, we take an oil rig in Perth, for instance, who had a governance policy that they had to actually fly a helicopter out every week to collect tapes off the oil rig and bring them back on shore, just because their 2 meg satellite link wasn't enough to do a backup over, right? So they moved to SimpliVity, and they're now being able to back up over that small 2 meg link, and it's essentially eliminated the cost of having to fly a weekly helicopter out to this. And that started paying for itself very, very quickly. There are customers as well who've gone from 3 racks of legacy equipment and essentially shrunk that down to just half a rack of equipment, and that saved them a lot on co-location costs there, because that was in a colo data center. So we've talked about some of these benefits, and we're just going to quickly say how we can help and what's the real offer here. And obviously, Brennan IT have a lot of expertise when it comes to consulting and advising, designing, deploying, and integrating, as well as providing managed hybrid IT services. But today, we're really, excited to be able to offer a Brennan and Hewlett-Packard combined consultation and advice and design, deploying, integration sort of service through a workshop that we're happy to host at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise at Rhodes at our Solution Center, where we pretty much take you on a journey to the hybrid cloud through SimpliVity and walk you through the SimpliVity solution a bit more, let you see the interface through vCenter, let you actually witness some of these claims that I've talked about that there are sometimes a bit hard to believe. And if you want to see that with your own eyes, then we encourage you to do so. And we can also take you on a data center tour and just have a look at the actual physical boxes if need be as well. Together with Brennan IT, we'd like to, put that offer out there for the first 3 customers who want to actually take this workshop from Brennan IT and Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So what basically will happen is, at the conclusion of this, when we send out the slides and we send out all the quick Q&A and the answers, Brennan IT will give you the opportunity to contact them and say that you'd like to actually put your name down for that. So we want to offer 3 of those to the customers today who wish to actually take that next step and learn a bit more about this.
And on the sort of ongoing management of the operating systems, Brendan's got a lot of experience at that, and we'll monitor through our SCOM monitoring system, basically ongoing, and patch, make changes as needed to keep your operating system applications up and running once you're sort of working onto your HCI solution. So that's an ongoing sort of service that we can offer to our customers after this thing is built. So really, I just want to summarize on that. With HCI solutions and with cloud feasibility workshops, that combination, we can really start to offer a seamless and integrated experience, irrespective of where your data is or what solution it's on. You don't need, if you want to outsource your IT sort of day-to-day infrastructure, you can still do that without necessarily having to go into a cloud solution or leaving it as traditionally on-premise. You get a dedicated service management team with Brennan IT, and it's the same service experience irrespective of where you are. We'll give you continual monitoring and optimization through our service management team. We'll actually provide you with a service manager that gives you monthly reports and talks through sort of trending, optimization, and ongoing things that we can do to fine-tune your environment. You'll get a rigorous service level agreement where we'll define the availability and quality measures for what we do. And you'll get your own sort of dedicated support team, which includes a client manager, a service manager, a managed services consultant, and there's like a pool of sort of share technical resources underneath that. So that's the end of the presentation. So we'll now shift into the Q&A section. So if anyone would like to type up any questions they have, we'll be online available to answer them real time.
All right, questions are starting to come in. One of the ones that were asked here is how quickly can we expect deployment if we were to kick off now? So deployment, obviously we talked about quite a lot of assessments. We just want to make sure we get that right. But essentially we've seen deployment times of, from beginning of negotiation to actual deployment as little as, I'd say, about 8 to 9 weeks. Being able to plan that in a month and then get the kit on site, implemented, trained, and handed over to customers. Just have a look at the next question now.
Okay, yeah, so the next question is on what are the SLAs Brennan offer on HCI as opposed to public cloud? They're essentially the same. There's no difference in terms of availability. The teams actually will provide you a seamless experience, irrespective of what the underlying solution is. We're just waiting on any more questions.
There's a question here on does the WAN optimization require HP across the WAN, as in like the kit? When we say we eliminate the need for a WAN optimization solution, essentially what we mean here is that because if you have, let's say, 2 sites, one in Melbourne and one in Sydney, and you had 2 nodes of SimpliVity hyperconverged nodes in Sydney and 1 node as your remote site for backup, say, because you have local backups here in Sydney and remote backups in Melbourne, you're actually sending everything under this data virtualization platform of HP SimpliVity. So when you have, say, a half terabyte VM that you want to back up from Sydney to Melbourne, a lot of that makeup of that VM could be a Windows operating system. So we're not actually sending over anything unless it is a different, because we break everything down to 8K block sizes. So you're not actually sending a half terabyte VM over to Melbourne to get backed up. You're only sending the changes between what the SimpliVity system will find in the VM that it doesn't have before, so the unique differences. So we find at a half terabyte VM that you might only see 70 megabytes of data get sent over your pipe, which means that we've got customers who've reduced their pipes So they're not actually having to go and you know, get a WAN solution as such. They just be able to make use of make use of their existing pipe or reduce that pipe and pay a less fee per month because you're not sending as much over that pipe. Hope that clarifies it a bit more. So just to clarify, I was just talking to Dale, you know, if it is a remote site with only a few users, you don't actually need a WAN optimized solution, a WAN optimizer at that remote site. You just need to have, you'd be running HPE SimpliVity at least one node of it at that remote site. So another question is coming just regarding the backups and the DR. You know, do you still require a separate agent such as Veeam? So about 50% of our HPE SimpliVity customers have retired a separate solution like Veeam or Commvault, and they've just used the inherent backup that's been built into the SimpliVity software. We do still, though, have customers who choose to run Veeam because they're saying they might need to run a separate backup solution to back up the data onto, say, tape, and they'll be using Veeam to handle things like that. So very, very granular things, they might still take advantage of Veeam because of, say, other backup and governance policies. But a lot of our customers, especially in the SMB space, have just decommissioned a separate backup solution altogether, and they can manage it all with HPE SimpliVity.
Okay, guys, that concludes the webinar. So thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate that some of you might have had some difficulties with hearing us, and we apologise for that. You'll get a copy of this recording tomorrow. Hopefully you hear it nice and clear on that recording, and we'll be in contact via that same email if you want to come back to us with arranging some kind of consultation. Thanks very much for your time.